Welcome into Basketball by Association, your midweek BbA Byte, off by one day, but not off on the content. One more day for me to be happy. Arky, Shea here, Joel C. Cordes there. Joel, hello.
Hello, and I'm ready to talk some basketball in Byte-like fashion.
That's right, and let's start with the hottest news. 8 straight, baby, for these New York Knicks. I want to say very humbly, suck it, haters. Winners of 8 of their last 10. Bad news is, so have the Celtics and Hawks, who they're battling with for the home court spot, number 4 spot in the East, have won 8 of their last 10 too. Mm-hmm. But I've done, I think, a very good job this season of not rubbing the Knicks on every single podcast. But can we just spend a minute on the red-hot New York Knicks, who on a second night of a back-to-back come back and get a huge win in overtime? In fact, just blow the Hawks out in overtime. And my New York Knicks are the bee's knees right now and the toast of the town. And Julius Randle continues to kill it.
Yeah, and not only are they getting airtime, which they always do because they're the New York Knicks and it's a big market team and it just kind of goes with the territory, but positive airtime over a while. I mean, everybody wants to write about them. Everybody wants to talk about them. They're on Sports Center, and it is a sigh of relief. And really, this whole season, I think, has been kind of a sigh of relief after so many dark and down years. And there was a couple of little bright spots in between there. You think about like the Amari Stoudemire, Carmelo Anthony team that they had a nice little mini run in there, but just a breath of fresh air to go, okay, we seem to be on the right track. Positive things are happening. And just the fact that we can say playing for home court advantage this late in the season, it does make it a successful year for the Knicks. I think regardless of how this winds up, and I'm not saying this is the end or anything, but I would consider it a success already just by being able to say that. They're playing meaningful basketball late in the season and not just being in the playoff picture. Now they're looking at potentially hosting at Madison Square Garden.
40-11 in 41 minutes for Julius Randle. And listen, I get the pipe dream of this. But if everyone's going to spend like a month on the injured list, at some point Julius Randle needs to get some consideration for votes for MVP this season, because he has been consistently very, 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 very good. And I think it's a shame he's going to end up like being like second team NBA or something, because he's been bonkers good for this New York Knicks team, and he's a huge reason. He's playing in a huge like pay me year, right? Like he's playing like we thought Julius Randle was done, and now this year he has just been what we thought he always could be. And I love it, man. I love seeing it because he's not putting up itty bitty numbers. It's double doubles all over the place and tons of points, and it's
we gotta
talk about him.
Yeah, and he poses such a big matchup problem because the Knicks are deploying him as if he's a point forward, and he's got enough skills and really has always been a guy that can do that can get in the open floor and attack downhill. He's not going to break you down off the dribble, but he's going to bully you off the dribble, and there aren't a lot of defenders who want to hang with that. But then his ability, once he gets down into the post, to make good things happen, and he is a fairly adept passer. He's an active rebounder. Those were all things that we saw in flashes when he was with Los Angeles, when he was with New Orleans, but he wasn't always deployed to kind of be the focal point to use those things. He was as a secondary guy, or he was competing with other players who were kind of trying to figure out their roles too. So credit to Julius Randle for putting this all together with the skills that he's always had. But you're right, he's taken it up a notch. Credit to Tom Thibodeau and the Knicks for recognizing, like, this is our bell cow. This is the guy who is going to get us where we need to be. And we have to build almost everything we do offensively around his talents. And that's worked out very well. And to Thibodeau's credit, he talked about how at the beginning of the season, like so many coaches who have had Julius Randle, Thibodeau is like, I don't really know what I have with this guy. Like, I'm not really sold on him. He puts up nice stats, but I'm not really sure how it wins. And he worked through that and recognized that. And some of it is out of necessity. The Knicks don't have a lot of other top tier offensive threats beyond RJ Barrett, who still is developing into that sort of thing. But they recognize what they have and they've deployed it well. And I think the credit also then goes to Randall of he's played good enough defense to stay on the floor on a Tom Thibodeau team, because that is a prerequisite or you get in the doghouse real quick.
For real, 41 minutes last night. I just want to mention this and then we can move on. Knicks won 8 of 10.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 losses before this 8-game winning streak, a 2-point loss to the Nets, a 2-point loss to the Celtics, and the wins over Memphis, Toronto, the Lakers, a couple over the Pelicans, against the Mavericks, against the Hornets and Hawks, who they're battling for that playoff spot for as well. It's just a very good stretch coming at a really good time for New York, because we're only looking at the last 15, 17 games or so of the season, and it's a good time to get pretty warm.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a murderer's row of opponents that they face, but it's all pretty much quality opponents. And
yes, that's the point.
Yeah. Some of them, like Brooklyn, have had their injury issues and whatever. But if you're going to make a run late season, you have to take advantage and win games like the Knicks are doing. You cannot have a loss of focus type of game where you drop one to a team that you really had no business losing to. And there again,
Minnesota.
Yeah, well, we'll put that one in the past. But, those loss of focus games are inevitable to some extent in a long NBA season. However, it's mitigating and minimizing those. That's the sign of a team that's dialed in. And New York has more or less been able to do that. And they've been in and won some of the games that they've had against those top tier opponents. So, yeah, it's a nice run. On the flip side, they're only 6 games above 500. Are they going to be able to catch anybody for like the 3 seed ahead of them, with Milwaukee, sitting 4.5 games up, 3.5 games up? That's probably not likely. But again, if you can get the 4 seed this season and be that far ahead of schedule, everybody's going to walk out of that and feel real good, so long as you can build on it.
Speaking of, by the way, those Brooklyn Nets, the last time we saw James Harden was against the New York Knicks.
Yeah.
And that was back on April the 5th. He only played a handful of minutes before he left that game. Well, the news obviously has come out recently, and in fact, it's 2 days ago as of, I guess, this recording this. Maybe it's 3 days, whatever. Steve Nash said during a rehab drill that James Harden came up a little lame again on that hamstring and wondered when an MRI, and it showed in the MRI that he's back to, quote, square one.
Yeah.
For James Harden. And I just mentioned how much time's left in the season. It's not a lot. Brooklyn's still winning games without him, although without Harden, they're only 4-3 during the stretch. And that's different than what they've been doing without Kyrie or without Durant. Like, James Harden seems to have been a real linchpin for this team. And kind of a weird thing to say at this point, but James Harden's kind of been an unsung leader for this Brooklyn Nets.
He's been the real MVP for that team, and he's only played half the season there.
Right. It's kind of wild, but it's completely true. I want to ask this to you, because we may not see this team fully healthy or fully together again until the playoffs. Is that bad news for Brooklyn? Like, are we really worried that Brooklyn, in one sort of early warming up type series, won't have enough games together, despite all that talent, to be able to make that championship run that we've been assuming that they would make if they'd ever get healthy and stay healthy?
Worry level has to be incredibly high. The only positive spin out of this is that if this team somehow does make it to an NBA Finals, much less win it, they will not have bought a championship like everyone, wants to accuse, and maybe rightfully so. They will have earned it. If you can come together and amass that type of talent and actually marshal it productively with no real amount of lead-up time, then you will have earned it, because it is going to be enormously difficult at this point. And with each passing day, and like you said, it doesn't sound like Harden's coming back anytime soon. and Durant once again comes back from injury and is then in and out of the lineup, which you and I talked about a couple weeks ago when his return was imminent. And I said, yeah, it's great that he's back and it's great that he looked okay, but show me 10 games in a row where he actually plays, and I'll give you a more honest assessment. And we haven't gotten those, right? We've gotten Kyrie Irving now, and Murphy's Law, for this team at least, says that once Harden is back, Kyrie's going to be gone with something. Like, you can't get them all in the same room. I'm starting to wonder if they actually have all three of them, or this is like a smoke and mirrors type of thing. Maybe all three don't exist. They're just costume changing, and there's only two of them.
That's the good point. It's like, have we ever seen all three of them on the court at the same time? I mean, technically, I think the game logs say so, but there have been no fans in those games, right? So
Bruce Wayne and Batman, I ain't never seen them in the same room together.
So, does this latest James Harden sort of announcement and setback, does it change who you think is going to win the East?
I will be surprised at this point if Brooklyn wins the East. However, Milwaukee has not been fully healthy for a little while either. They're 5-5 in their last 10, just like Brooklyn is. Philadelphia remains the front runner by default. Their injury issues of late have been less serious. But again, there's the Joel Embiid stuff that continues to loom. And he is one of those red flag type guys. So it really might come down to which one of those top three are the healthiest to be able to get out. I think on paper, when they're all at full strength, they're all about equal. Now, on paper, you would say Brooklyn should be head and shoulders above all them, but they don't have the chemistry to use all that talent yet. They haven't been able to cultivate that. So Philadelphia and Milwaukee have a built-in advantage of cohesiveness, even if they're not quite as talented on the top line. So I really do think it's a dead heat between all three, and which one will have their superstars fully deployed. In Milwaukee's case, maybe it's to their advantage or their disadvantage that when you talk about superstars, it really is one guy. As good as Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday are, those are stars, not superstars. But Philadelphia's got two of them and Brooklyn's got three. So if everybody's healthy, superstars win games in the playoffs, but it's too early to call, man. And that's a cop-out on my part, but that is what these injuries have done. And when Giannis wasn't playing full games, there was no way that Milwaukee was, going to be able to win a second-round series, much less a first-round one. Right.
You brought up Milwaukee, and Milwaukee's not playing very well like when they play good opponents either. Like when they're playing like teams that are above 500, they don't look good. And it does worry you as far as who could be then that number 2 or 2A or even 3, because by the time you get to what would be, I guess, the Eastern Conference semis, which is the second round, it's that one of those teams that we didn't expect on the quote-unquote bottom of the Eastern Conference might be able to give them a run we weren't sort of expecting. Philadelphia, I feel stronger about. Like we've talked about this before. Brooklyn has this huge boom potential, right? Like if we've seen in a very limited number of games, but if all three of those guys are together and healthy, man, they're just running guys out of the gym, right? Like they can be that good.
They're kind of like the Ferrari that's got 2 cylinders missing, right? On paper, it's really impressive, and from the outside, really good. But until you get that engine fixed all the way, you can beat it, right? It ain't running the way it's supposed to.
Right, like my Prius is going to be able to take it off the line if you keep watching. And I don't want to call Philadelphia a Prius. I might call the Knicks a. No, they're not a Prius. No, they're not fuel efficient at all. They're great. But Philadelphia has sort of been that stalwart that, despite losing Joel Embiid for a few weeks, they still played really well, and they get him back, and they aren't hamstrung with major injuries to that team. They just sort of seem like. Far be it for me to call them sort of that quiet number 2 that's just sitting there, but they're just perched ready to attack, I think, in that if they get a matchup against Brooklyn, and especially if Brooklyn is sort of limping into that series for the Eastern Conference Finals, if they get to it, I'm not so sure I wouldn't take Philadelphia at this point. Like I feel like the sexiness is Brooklyn, and the potential, the pure potential, which is what a lot of betting lines will be on if you're interested in playing all that, which I will be. It'll be hard for me not to play that, but I feel like the smart play might be Philadelphia, since like we may not see James Harden until the end of May, which is the start of the playoffs.
And even though Philadelphia did shuffle the deck on their roster, it's not to the extent that Milwaukee or Brooklyn did. Philadelphia added some more shooters into the mix, and Seth Curry and Danny Green. But Danny Green's a guy who's been around the block in the playoffs plenty of times, and Seth Curry's got some experience there as well. Some of the younger guys in the backcourt, Shake Milton and Tyrese Maxey, playing big minutes for them. But Shake Milton's been on that team before and played with that group. So you just look, and we've talked about this too, in a year of topsy-turviness, that chemistry and cohesiveness and stuff that you've built up over the past couple of seasons is going to make a big deal. And in that regard, Milwaukee's got some advantages, though they've made some bigger changes. Drew Holiday wasn't there before. You still look at kind of the core guys: Middleton, Giannis, Brook Lopez, DiVincenzo, Pat Connaughton. A lot of those guys were there previously, and now they've added in Drew Holiday. Bryn Forbes comes in. PJ Tucker's obviously going to play big minutes for them in the playoffs, and Bobby Portis. So there's some new parts. Brooklyn, on the other hand, you look at that roster and you go, okay, I recognize that Joe Harris guy. I don't know if any of those guys were on that team last year, and almost to a man, they weren't. So it's not just, my stars have to get together and figure this all out. It's everybody else has to figure out how they fit in with said stars, and to go, I'm getting 3, 4, 5 less shots tonight because so-and-so is back, but I got to be able to pick up the slack somewhere else. And I'm supposed to preternaturally know where he's going to be on the court and vice versa. Like, everybody's professionals, yes, but that doesn't come until you've actually played with guys. And basketball, again, is not a 2-man game, right? It's 5 playing jazz out there and reading off of each other. And you cannot manufacture that artificially. It doesn't happen.
And I'll say this because we've talked about this briefly with the Suns, and I think it's kind of a similar thing with Brooklyn, although not completely the same, which is, teams get really hot and really good that come out of nowhere or early on in sort of their run for the playoffs, like the Suns, and we think, man, they're really good. But like teams like that don't usually go and win a championship. And I think when it comes to Brooklyn, even though those guys have championship experience and championships together, I think that when you don't get all those pieces to be able to play together, it feels like sort of a burgeoning new team. And you can look to Philadelphia, who's got dudes who Joel Embiid was crying, sobbing after losing Game 7 of the Eastern Finals a couple years ago to Toronto. I mean, this team has been there, experienced the lows of the process, and they've also experienced the highs of being close to getting to the NBA Finals. That I think there may be a sense that if you get to that 7th game, right, there may be a dog underneath those Philadelphia 76ers that give them an advantage to win a Game 7 and to get the NBA Finals. And I think it's because you're going against what looks like a new team but full of a bunch of guys who, like, I don't know how you can have worse sort of injury luck with your major players throughout a season consistently, and not just being one big injury for either one of them, than what the Nets have had for such a good team.
It reminds me of the late 90s, really, Miami Heat, when they assembled one of the first super teams of the modern era, and they brought in Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway in quick succession, but then also added around that PJ Brown, who was a fringe all-star type guy, Dan Marley, who had been an all-star in Phoenix, and Jamal Mashburn, who was one of the young up-and-coming, like, potential superstars in the league at that time, is how he was considered. And on paper, that was a team that was like ready to go toe-to-toe with Chicago in the East. They were absolutely loaded. but Marley was never healthy. Mashburn was never healthy. PJ Brown missed some games in there too. Vashawn Leonard was a guy that was kind of in and out of the lineup. And then once you started to get those guys a little healthier, then Tim Hardaway was breaking down. Like, they just never had everybody together in a fully healthy way to deploy what it looked like on paper. The Nets feel younger than that, but they're really not. We're talking about guys in their early 30s.
Yeah.
And that's really the same type of window. And with the salary cap, the way that it's structured now, like, this is their window where they've got some ring chaser guys. They were able to lock up Joe Harris. They've got Landry Shamet under contract, who started out the season very poorly and now all of a sudden has played really, really well. But this is not a cut and dry, like, oh, you've got a 5-6 year window with this group if it doesn't happen. No. That pressure is on. And if I'm the Sixers, I'm looking at that going, okay, Brooklyn's not right. They're not invincible. Let's hope they don't get healthy. But even if they do, we don't have to fear that. We don't have LeBron James in the conference anymore. We don't have Kawhi Leonard taking a little vacation in Toronto in the Eastern Conference anymore. And Milwaukee's not playing like a juggernaut like they were last year. If I'm Philadelphia, you have to be going, this is our year, guys. Yep. This is our year to do it.
And let's also, despite how a couple of series have ended, even one recently with him, they got a dude on the staff that's coaching them that's got plenty of playoff experience and a ring. And I feel like that's a big deal. That's a big deal going against Steve Nash and the co-head coach Kyrie Irving, or as Kyrie Irving said before the season, whoever wants to be coach at that moment.
Right. Speaking of coaches, I do want to put in this little nest this in our listeners' ears. If the Bucks flame out, and we've said this before, if the Bucks flame out, watch Budenholzer get fired because he's been there a couple of years and his playoff issues are well known at this point. Mm-hmm. If the Boston Celtics nosedive here at the end of the season, or if they get bounced in the first round, which is a possibility, and that would be a massive disappointment of a year. As much as Boston loves Brad Stevens, you might see Danny Ainge make him the sacrificial lamb, and you might see Brad Stevens wind up in Milwaukee. I'm just seeing. Okay. It's not tea leaves that I'm seeing out there, but it's scenarios where I go, that is the type of guy that Milwaukee would go after to try to keep Giannis happy, because that's what it's going to be all about. And I think Bud is on his last season there if they do not make it to the NBA finals or have a hell of a series in the conference finals where you go, yeah, we were in it till the very end.
Well, you're seeing connective tissue. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Last story, we'll spend just a couple of moments on it. Steph Curry's 11-game streak of scoring 30 points or more is no mas, as he goes a putrid 2 for 14 from beyond the arc and just 18 points against Washington, 7 of 25. Puh, spit on that, Steph Curry. He is the oldest to have done at least 10 games of 30 or more, 10 straight games of 30 or more points. And the first since, do you know the name?
10 straight games of 30 or more. And I should, because I think I saw this the other day. Was it Kobe?
It's Kobe back in 2012. How will you look at what Steph Curry did during this streak? Because the way he scored is a little different than the way Kobe scored those points.
Absolutely. You could make the case that with all the threes getting chucked up, he gets to those points faster. I mean, it's just math, but
he's got a 49-point game in there.
Yeah. I'm not throwing any shade whatsoever. I'm just being facetious. But I think once and for all, it has shown that Steph Curry is not only back from the injuries that shelved him most of last year, because that was a question for a while. But I think it also helps to solidify the legacy of him as a true superstar. Not just a guy where, oh yeah, he was so good, but remember, he was playing with Clay and Draymond at their prime, and then he had Kevin Durant, so he's really good, but the defense couldn't really key off on him. Like, you look at that Warriors team now, and yeah, they have Andrew Wiggins, who, by the way, went 5 for 20 the other night, so he didn't really help the cause. And, Kelly Oubre can score as well, but those are not Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant level players offensively. And Curry has had to carry this team to a 29-30 record, but putting up historic numbers. And you go, yeah, he is that good. When the defense is focusing on him and there's no bailout guy really that is going to just absolutely destroy you like Klay Thompson can or Durant did, it doesn't matter. You and I talked about this like a week or two ago. It does not matter how you are guarding him. If he's on that night, which has been more often than not, and occasionally he will get a dud like this, and this is where the prognosticators like Charles Barkley will go, see, I told you, die by the 3, but it's like, okay, that's 1 out of every, 21 games or so that a dud like this comes along.
And it was like 8 years ago you said that.
Right. I mean, he is that good. He is an absolute showstopper to watch. At this point, it's kind of like with LeBron. Whether you like him or not, whether you find reasons that you don't like the guy, you have to enjoy him because you don't see this except once in a generation. Yep. And he is one of the most unique players of all time. Even back to the day, you go, all right, Pistol Pete, maybe, but Curry does things that even Pistol Pete doesn't or didn't. And he's a joy to watch. And, the Warriors, despite being 29-30, like they're worth tuning into most nights just to watch Curry's minutes.
This is why I hate when we get into like the LeBron versus Michael Jordan for greatest of all time, because I think it takes up so much air out of the room to just enjoy like the greatest shooter we've ever seen do things that have never been done in the NBA, and guys who are emulating him, like Damian Lillard, right? Like it's doing a lot of what he does, and
Trae Young.
It's like it's a new breed of shooter that he has sort of ushered in, and people have sort of followed his stroke and what he's done. When he was going back and forth with Tatum against Boston, I think it was last week, they were down 5 and they just called timeout, and I think there was like 4 seconds or something to go, and Kerr calls basically a quick inbound pass to Curry. Curry throws it up from like 43.5 feet, and when he did, I expected the thing to go in.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was like, that's probably going in, and we're going back to free throws and we're going to see if we can cover this Boston -4. But the way that game was happening, I completely expected that to happen. And I think a lot of people who were watching it and some who were in there, including the other teammates, were expecting it to go in too. The fact that he called it here you go, 43.5, double covered, by the way. Just 3-point shot, and it wasn't all that off, to be honest with you. That is a viable play. Just sort of speaks to what Steph Curry freaking is, man.
Yeah, and even for the purists who are like, "Oh, he's ruining the game. He ruined the game." Like, ruining the game would be if he was chucking them up from there and not making them.
Right.
The fact that he is making them and has changed the game. You may not like the change. Fair enough. But for me at least, and most basketball fans, I think you watch the game to see guys who are at the top of their craft, work through that craft and do something that you and I and the basic human being can't do. Like, we're not an elite athlete like that. And to be an NBA player is a totally even different type of elite athlete. And that's really where the enjoyment comes from. So whether you agree with how the game has been changed or not, you are watching someone do something incredibly hard at an ultra, ultra, ultra elite level. And I mean, that's what the game is about, really. Like, appreciate that.
He's made shooting and threes sexy. Like, the league had so much sex appeal based on just slamming dunks, like, and posterizing. That was all the highlights. And now you just get great threes thrown out there that are on the top 10 list of everyone throwing out there every day. And NBA.com does a great job of putting those out too. It's just sort of changed how we watch sport too, that he's been nothing but great for the game. He's been thoroughly entertaining and interesting for the game. And the fact that he's been so prolific at it, like, it's not the first guy just ham-fisting it through. Like, he had like 43s over a 3-month stretch, and he was the first guy to do something like that. He's just at 33 too. He's 33 years old, by the way.
Right.
Like, he's becoming a little like on the ancient side as far as shooting and the NBA is concerned, but still, on a team that's hovering around 500 to be able to get that much attention because of shooting threes. That's something, man. That is.
And, different guys have come through the league and the game has been changed because of them. The lane was widened, or you had to add a breakaway rim, or you had to change the defensive rules. And Curry may honestly be the one who changes the game, not only to the point that we've seen it, where just offenses have inverted themselves and sped up and become about the shooting and stretchability and gravity and all that stuff. But he may be the guy who gets the 3-point line pulled back from where it is.
Or we may get a 4-point shot. I mean, maybe not.
Or the 4-point line. And that's going to be as much to Curry as, anything that Bill Russell or Shaq or any of these other, Jordan, any of these other guys did that came along and you actually physically had to change the game to account for them. Wilt Chamberlain is another one like that.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for the BbA Byte this week. Joel, we'll be back on Sunday for another sweet pod. Until then, you should tell people how they can go find the video of this format if they're not watching it right now. Because if you are, I think you found it. But if you haven't,
yeah, congratulations. If you are on YouTube, please give us a like, a subscribe, a share, all that good stuff. We're trying to get the channel off the ground, so we appreciate all of you who tune in that way. If you're listening on Audio Boom, Spotify, iTunes, anywhere that you get your Spreaker, anywhere that you get your podcasts, thank you for listening there. Check out the YouTube channel and vice versa if you want the audio only. And I'll leave you with this, Arky Shea. We can talk about it next week. You were trying to come up with a vehicle comparison for your New York Knicks. I think they're a Humvee.
It's not the worst. I'll tell you that. Like there is some merit to the Humvee.
We'll break that down next week.
All right. See you guys.